And God willing, as we shall return.
And welcome to the first Artemis podcast. Here joining me on the air is Woog, say hello.
Hello.
And Mr. Fu.
Hey, how's it going?
Okay, and we have two more people here in the audience who are just here to listen. Where do we really start? We had core stage rollout this week. We had the Pegasus barge actually make its way to Stennis. I believe it's still on its way there as we speak. What do we think about green run testing?
Even though it's pushes back the launch date a bit, I think it's pretty critical.
Definitely, and they said that in a tweet by Bridenstine, it was a few months ago, that they mentioned that we need to search for problems now in the green run test before we find them sometime later in a potential abort in an Artemis 2 or 3 mission down the line, which would be devastating to the program.
Yeah, I kind of think that there are two ways of looking at it. Like what Curb's saying is it's kind of a waste of time, but which I partially agree with, because these are such tried and true engine platforms that it just kind of seems like an unnecessary step. I mean, I know it is one more way of certifying the vehicle for its first launch, but they're so comfortable with those engines that it just seems kind of odd to me.
Definitely. They have how many engines? Like 12 in storage from the space shuttle program that ended in 2011? And they've flown on countless flights over and over again. It's just, I think the argument there from a lot of the workers, from their point of view, is that we have all this new propellant systems that we need to verify, and even though we do the testing, you really don't know until you fire it up on the B2 stand.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I think it is kind of a bummer that it's pushing back the timeline a bit, but in the essence of being safe, it makes sense. It's also just, I guess there's just two ways of looking at it, and I guess it's better to be safe than sorry in the long run.
Yeah, what they said, I think we had like some guy on the SLS Reddit, was it, who said that green run, like the actual hot fire, was gonna happen around like late July and August. Actually, like, it's almost there right now. We're just waiting for the confirmation, and then they're gonna load it onto the stand sometime early this week, I believe, is the consensus.
We've got a question about the space shuttle being able to fly to the moon. No, it never would have had that capability unless there were some way to add additional fuel once it was already up in orbit. That orange tank is where it pulled all of its fuel from its ascent stage. So as soon as that was gone and they dumped that, there was not enough fuel in the shuttle to do anything other than deorbit.
Yeah, what was the dry mass of the shuttle like once it was in orbit?
I'm not sure.
It was at least like 20 tons, I think, and you have all those tiles and everything that you have to carry up there too.
This is saying dry mass of 172,000 pounds.
And then they had to carry some payloads too to try and use it better.
I'm seeing some conflicting information, but that sounds about right.
Woo, do we have any insider information? What's the latest on that with Green Run? Because we're not getting any scheduling on our end.
I guess he's not either.
I guess so. I mean, we do have, we've had someone we've been in contact with at MAF, the place where they make the actual core stage, and they actually said yesterday that they would be shipping the barge this morning, and you can see in that image posted on the NASA subreddit right there, that's up right now, you can see them with the tugs. They were pulling it out of the canal early this morning, and they're almost there, like we said. And then they had the heat shield for the Artemis 2 right there. We haven't gotten many looks at the actual like pressurized module. What's up with that?
I don't think we've gotten any pictures of it since September.
Yeah, and then like I think the ESD from October, they really neglected the whole Artemis 2 thing and the whole Green Run thing. They had a Green Run slide, but they didn't have any schedule on it because they were still trying to work out their directorate, I think, for the program. There was some issue with management. In terms of their astronauts, who's on that list? I didn't really pay much attention, but we have, 12 people that are now on the roster that could go to, like, they said the International Space Station and the Artemis missions to the Moon and Mars.
It's actually 13.
13, yeah. When do you think they'll be picking, like, the crew out of those for the Artemis 2 mission? Because we know it's scheduled for sometime in late 2022, they said.
Last I heard.
And Woo, let me just put you up a bit on volume because you're a little quiet here, but the whole delays for the program actually wouldn't really affect the Artemis 3 deadline of 2024 for the first woman and next man on the moon, because a lot of that architecture would be Gateway. We don't really have much on Gateway right now. It's in early stages of development, but you know, hopefully we get word on that. You mentioned we had some Government Accountability Office document on the whole human landing system.
It wasn't specifically about the human landing system. It was more on the entire Artemis program. I brought up that NASA plans on picking one or more contractors for the human landing system by January, although that looks like March right now. And
Yeah, they keep pushing it back.
going off more recent information, it looks like they're going to do like some 10-month study with new contractors until they pick the final design in late 2020 or early 2021.
Yeah, and they released the Appendix H, was it? With all the details on what you should design the lander for and what it should be able to do. It's like, close to a month on the moon, was it, that they want to eventually get to?
Is the intent that they're gonna do like an automated test run on one of those landers at the moon, or are they gonna basically do what they did with Apollo and just kind of put all your eggs in one basket and hope it works?
My money is that they're not going to be doing a test run. We haven't heard anything of a test run as far as we know, even though like Bridenstine likes to make the claim that Artemis is the #1 safest approach to the moon or whatever. It probably won't be able to. If you think about it, the Gateway will be up and running with, like, at most, maybe a year of leeway, of, like, cushion. And then you gotta send up 2 landers, and each of those landers has a 3-stage approach with the descent stage, the orbit stage, and the ascent stage. So you gotta send 6 modules of that up there, and
Like the baseline, companies can do with simpler designs.
yeah, they mentioned that in the document. They said they could be taking like 2-stage designs. I'm pretty sure a 1-stage design would be really out of the question because of the cost, and delta V would just be enormous for a single.
SSTO.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, we'll take questions right now. If you have questions and micless people, the rest of the members of the Artemis server, there's about 130 of us actually. We'll link that later.
How fast does a shuttle travel, and at what altitude? So the whole premise of the shuttle is low Earth orbit, right? So it's gonna match the same capabilities as virtually any other orbital class payload delivery system, getting to basically the altitude of the ISS and also matching that velocity at that particular altitude. So you could basically go across the board, and those type of stats on launch vehicles are not necessarily as pertinent as some of the other stuff that seems more boring, because again, if you're getting to that altitude, you're going that same speed as everything else that got to the same altitude in that orbit, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know, it really depends on the whole thrust to weight too, because Saturn V, one of the reasons why it was so big was because the thrust to weight at launch was like just over 1, and it was lumbering up.
Yeah, it's like painfully slow.
Yeah,
it looks like slow motion when you watch some of that footage, and you're like,
Yeah,
is
it
it gonna
does.
go?
10 seconds to clear the tower roughly, and what is with SLS, like 5?
Actually, this kind of reminds me when I was when I went and saw Colonel Wheelock, Army astronaut who did a talk to about 20 of us a couple months ago. He was talking about the differences in his experiences. He went up on one mission with a shuttle, and he went up on a mission on a Soyuz. And he was talking about the differences of ascent and descent from those two different vehicles. Though they're accomplishing essentially the same thing for what they were doing, getting the crew up to the ISS, he said the space shuttle is a very unpleasant experience when it launches because you have those SRBs that are immediately pushing you back into your seat. So you're getting those G-forces instantaneously. But the contrary to that is on its way down. He said it was absolutely like butter. He barely felt anything, maybe some slight vibrations in the craft as it's coming down, but because of its shallow approach as it was coming through the atmosphere and the fact that it turned into a glide vehicle at lower altitudes, it was super smooth. And he said that it was exactly the opposite on the Soyuz. So the Soyuz, having just liquid propellant engines, it was very smooth and gradual with the G-forces on launch, but then coming in, that thing was just absolutely nuts. Everything's going crazy. Everything had to be tied down inside the capsule or else it was going to fly around all over the place. It was interesting that essentially, yeah, they're doing the same thing. They're getting to the ISS, but it's very different experiences based on what type of engines and propellants they're using.
November 11th, they said, at the KSC.
Yeah, so far it seems that NASA is publicly saying October, but realistically it's like November 11th.
Okay, so we have core stage shipped to Stennis. That's right now, actually. And then core stage load into B2 test stand. That will be 2 days after that. Modal test complete. What's that? Does anyone know?
Nah, I don't know.
Yeah, a lot of this is new stuff. Vehicle power on checks complete. They're gonna power on the stage for the first time. Alright, I think they already powered it on in math.
Modal testing is the vibration testing.
Oh, okay. And then main propulsion system and engine leak functional checks. They're obviously gonna have to get the whole plumbing done to the engines before they do that. Hydraulics, thrust vector control, safety checks, and then they're gonna do a whole wet dress before the hot fire in July, and then refurbishment could happen. I think it was. What was it?
4 months.
Yeah, they said they could happen. They could like move the refurbishment to the Space Center to Kennedy if they really wanted to.
Apparently they have like red lines covering some of the core stage, and like once they remove those red lines they'll put flight cameras.
Oh, that's interesting. So they'll have like a lot of the flight cameras like the Saturn V, but like on board the vehicle.
Well, it makes some pretty good footage.
Yeah, and then they have flight cameras on the tips of the solar arrays for Orion. It'll be like moon selfies.
Yeah. Ultimate selfie stick.
Yep. 4 GoPros
Better
connected by
than
Wi-Fi.
Apollo's.
Woog, do you have that? Do you have that video?
The video of the procedures.
Yeah, with the stacking ops.
Let me find it.
You're gonna love the music on this one.
Is that the International Space Station?
Talking about in the background.